کانون هنرمندان صدای دانشگاه دامغان تقدیم می‌کند.
Hello dear friends, welcome to the first episode of Ancient Echoes podcast series, through which we are going to explore Persia's history since the old times. When people think of ancient Iranian civilizations, they usually picture the Achaemenids, the Sassanids, or maybe even the Medes. But long before these great empires, there were people who lived among the mountains of the Zagros and the western plains of Iran. People whose names may not be as well known, yet their legacy remains carved into the very rocks of history. Among them were the Lullubis and the Gutians, tribes whose stories are a mix of war, survival, and cultural influence, stories that the stones and cuneiform inscriptions have carried through time. The Lullubis lived in the western regions of Iran, including Lorestan, Kurdistan, and parts of Iran. This was a harsh and mountainous land, but its very roughness gave the Lullubis a natural defense against their enemies. Ancient sources describe them as a resilient, independent people, unwilling to submit to foreign rule, especially to the mighty Assyrians. The Lullubis were living around the second millennium before the Common Era, and they weren't just herders and farmers. They were tough warriors, often facing off with the mighty Assyrian Empire. Cuneiform texts, especially from Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king who practically wrote a book on conquering everything in sight, mention the Lullubis as a significant threat and a serious challenge to Assyrian expansion. They were more than just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Assyrians waged several wars against them, but the Lullubis never made it easy for them. They resisted fiercely, and Assyrians records even described them as a troublesome and unyielding people. But perhaps what makes the Lullubis even more fascinating is the art they left behind. Today, in the mountains of Lorestan, you can still see their rock reliefs, ancient carvings that tell the story of their rulers and battles. One of the most famous among them is the relief of Nubenin, a Lullaby king, standing in triumph over his defeated enemies. The image shows captured soldiers, bound and kneeling before him, while the king stands tall, a symbol of power and defiance. But these weren't just any carvings. They were strategically placed around their strongholds, probably so anyone passing by could see. It was their ray showing strength and pride, almost like an ancient billboard promoting their culture and military prowess. But if we move farther northwest, toward Lake Urumia and parts of modern Kurdistan, we encounter another remarkable people, the Gutians. Unlike the Lullubis, who were more settled in the mountains, the Gutians roamed between highlands and open plains, giving them a strategic advantage in warfare. The Assyrians didn't exactly have an easy time with them, and in fact, the Gutians were pretty famous for making life miserable for Assyrian kings, especially Ashurbanipal. If you look at the Assyrians' records, you'll see them often mentioning the Gutians with a mix of respect and frustration. And they knew how to fight. The Gutians were experts in guerrilla warfare. While larger armies marched in formation, the Gutians struck fast at night and vanished into the mountains before their enemies could react and reappear when it was least expected. This made him a constant nightmare for the Assyrians. In fact, Assyrian records frequently complain about the Gutians' surprise attacks, which disrupted trade routes, weakened defenses, and often left cities defenseless. It wasn't just about raiding though. The Gutians weren't some scattered band of warriors. They had a political and military system advanced enough to allow them to not only resist Assyrian rule, but at times even take control of territories. Assyrian kings, especially Ashurbanipal, saw the Gutians as a serious threat, not just a passing nuisance. There were even periods in history where the Gutians were powerful enough to rule over regions of Mesopotamia, proving that they weren't just fighters, they were leaders, strategists, and empire builders. But there's another side to the Gutians that often gets overlooked. While history remembers them as warriors, they were also involved in trade, agriculture, and even diplomacy. The evidence we have of the Gutians comes from cuneiform texts, which are written by the Assyrians and sometimes by the Gutians themselves. Some cuneiform records suggest that Gutians worked as mercenaries for other kingdoms, selling their military expertise to the highest bidder. This meant they weren't just raiders. They were also players in the broader political and economic landscape of the time. If we look at their archaeological remains, we find inscriptions in Akkadian that mention Gutian rulers and their governance, proving that they had a structured society rather than being just a nomadic warrior tribe. The Lullubis and Gutians may not be as famous as the Achaemenids or the Sassanids, but their impact on the history of the region was undeniable. The Lullubis were among the first groups to resist Assyrian control, leaving behind powerful, artistic, and military symbols. The Gutians, on the other hand, perfected the art of survival, mastering guerrilla tactics and even taking control of major political centers. Their stories are written into stone and recorded in ancient texts, but these aren't just tales of battle. They're stories of people living in extreme conditions, finding ways to thrive, survive, and sometimes even stand up to the biggest power of their time. Their stories remind us that sometimes the real power in history lies not in the empires we know by name, but in the tribes and people who shape the world from the shadows. Stay tuned for more stories from ancient Iran as we continue to uncover the hidden gems of history. Goodbye.